Chapter 1131 A Quiz for Spirit Guardian. Zhu Jing readily agrees, and as Mu Yan called out to him and asks her to travel to Xinjing, and along the way, she must obey whatever Zhang Yi asks. Anything he asks for. Zhu Jing said this order to Mu Yan with a deep meaning. Mu Yan seemed to have come to a realization and quietly clenched her fists, but when she looked at Zhang Yi again, she subconsciously straightened her originally non-existent chest. Zhang Yi was somewhat speechless in his heart, but he was too lazy to explain. The main reason why he had brought Mu Yan along was because her shadow space could carry people. This way, Zhang Yi would be able to bring his entire family along and head to Xinjing region together. This also avoided the risk of a sneak attack on Tianhai City in his absence. As for the people from the three major bases, Zhang Yi could only hope that they would have better luck, and it was impossible for him to care about so many people. Anyway, it was basically unlikely for Tianhai City to be attacked when he and his family were away. Deng Shintong was also very happy to learn that Zhang Yi had agreed to go to Xinjing, and pleasantly told Zhang Yi that after going there, he could take Zhang Yi around for a good stroll and enjoy the scenery of the northern country. Zhang Yi was non-committal about this. More than those, I want to know the intelligence of several other regions. Can you get this for me? Deng Shintong scratched his head. It's easy to get the basic information, but I guess what you're most interested in is the epsilon intelligence of the several regions. That's classified. Zhang Yi shook his head. Give me as much as you have. It's better than nothing. He didn't want to delay, so he discussed with Zhu Zheng and Deng Shintong about the day to depart for Xinjing. The time Xinjing had set for them was 3 days later, so there was more time. Zhu Zheng said, "We'll depart from Blizzard City 3 days later, we'll arrange everything, just have you people come over." Zhang Yi nodded, "Then it's a deal." After saying that, he drove the car and left Blizzard City with Yang Xinxin, Flower, and the helper Mu Yan who had just come over. Mu Yan sat in the back row of the car, a little rushed and surprised inside. Zhang Yi taking the initiative to Zhu Jing showed that she was valuable to Zhang Yi. This made it possible for her to break away from Blizzard City and join amongst Zhang Yi's team. The car left Blizzard City all the way. Neither Zhang Yi nor Yang Xinxin spoke, but after leaving a certain range, Zhang Yi suddenly stopped the car in the middle of a snowy plain. He turned back and glanced at Mu Yan, with a full scrutiny in his eyes. "What did Zhu Jing do explain to you?" he asked indifferently. Mu Yan's hands on her knees immediately clenched as she straightened her back. "Commander Zhu was only instructing me to obey all the orders you proposed. Other than that, there is nothing more." Zhang Yi nodded, "That's right." He turned his head to Yang Xinxin. "Xinxin, do it." Before Mu Yan knew what Zhang Yi meant, she saw that behind Yang Xinxin, the Angel of Lust had already opened his bow and a red arrow aimed at her. Mu Yan had seen Yang Xinxin's ability, so she knew very well that this arrow did not have any lethality on people, but could make them fall into Yang Xinxin's slavery and obey all her orders. Mu Yan pursed her lips, knowing in her heart that this was the only way to gain Zhang Yi's trust, and that she had no qualifications to resist. Thus she very calmly accepted the arrow into her brow. Soon, she became Yang Xinxin's most loyal slave, looking at Yang Xinxin with a face full of fascination. Without the need for Zhang Yi to speak, Yang Xinxin began her interrogation of Mu Yan. "Tell me, what was the order Zhu Jing gave you for this operation?" "Follow Zhang Yi's side and completely obey all his orders." "Was that all the orders?" "It was." Zhang Yi looked at Yang Xinxin and smiled. "Zhu Jing isn't stupid, he knows what the consequences of offending me are." Even without Yang Xinxin's ability, Zhang Yi would have injected Mu Yan with a truth-spitting agent to verify her loyalty. Yang Xinxin nodded and continued to inquire, "Do you want to break away from Blizzard City?" Mu Yan nodded without any hesitation, "I want to." "Why?" "Because by staying, I'll definitely become the sustenance of Zhu Yu. I was born with that in mind, they told me that was my mission. But I don't want to die, I want to live." Yang Xinxin asked, "So the purpose of your approaching Zhang Yi was for this?" "Only Zhang Yi has the ability to protect me, so I want to follow him and get his protection." Yang Xinxin glanced at Zhang Yi. and suddenly a wave of mischief flowed out from among her eyes. She revealed a small tiger tooth and smiled wickedly. "How do you evaluate Zhang Yi?" Zhang Yi couldn't even help but freeze for a moment. Crikey, this question was really direct. He stared Mu Yan dead in the face, wanting to see exactly how this woman would evaluate him. That way, it would be possible to see her attitude towards Zhang Yi and whether or not she had the value to be included in the team. Mu Yan glanced at Zhang Yi and said calmly, "Intelligent, overly cautious, and powerful." In the midst of the post-apocalyptic world, it was a man worth relying on. Zhang Yi was all a bit fluttery. If he didn't believe in Yang Xinxin's ability, he would have even felt that Mu Yan was deliberately touting him. However, the smile at the corner of his mouth, if any, still revealed the smugness within him. There was no one who didn't like horse's ass. Yang Xinxin laughed evilly. "Is this all there is? There are no negative comments?" Mu Yan continued, "I haven't been in contact with him for a long time, so the information I've learned is also very little. If I have to say, then being cold-blooded and heartless towards outsiders and not having the slightest quality of being a strong person should be considered disadvantages. But these characteristics, I think, were extremely rare in the midst of the end times, and cannot even be considered drawbacks." The corners of Zhang Yi's mouth rose higher and higher as he nodded with deep conviction and exclaimed, "To think that she understands me so well." Yang Xinxin had wanted to tease Zhang Yi a bit, but as a result, she didn't expect that inside Mu Yan's eyes, Zhang Yi's image was so bright. But it was no wonder. Zhang Yi was a strong man, the #1 expert in the Jiangnan region, and the vast majority of people would bring their own strongman filters when they looked at him. If she had spent some time with Zhang Yi, she would have found out that Zhang Yi snored in his sleep, played games with Fatty Sue and cheated when he couldn't afford to lose, as well as the bedroom was never tidied up, and many other faults. Zhang Yi looked at Yang Xinxin. "I think this girl has a lot of potential. We can consider letting her join the shelter." Yang Xinxin looked at Zhang Yi with an odd expression. "Brother, what potential are you talking about? Which aspect was it?" Although Mu Yan's figure is slightly flat, whether it's her fair complexion or delicate face, or that charming silver hair after the mutation, the mystery brought by the black blindfold that was always over her eyes, she could easily charm any man. Zhang Yi said lightly, "In every aspect." "Xinxin, don't think too much. I am a decent man." Chapter 1132 Shadow Space. Yang Xinxin skimmed her mouth, surprisingly a bit sultry at Zhang Yi's statement. She whispered, "There are times when one does not need to be too righteous." Soon she raised her head, stared at Mu Yan, and inquired one last question. "If we let you join our team, would you be willing to be loyal to Zhang Yi, to the team?" Mu Yan pondered for a second and gave her answer. "As long as the team is able to give me a safe haven, so that my survival is well protected. I will also fight with all my might to maintain the team. Naturally, I will also offer my loyalty to the team's leader, Zhang Yi." Yang Xinxin and Zhang Yi glanced at each other. Yang Xinxin nodded. "Looks like she's pretty good." Zhang Yi nodded as well. "I feel the same way. It's worth taking, but Xinxin, is there any chance that your ability won't work on some people?" Yang Xinxin smiled. "Even against a Sky Dragon King in the Epsilon realm, my ability can work. Not to mention her." Zhang Yi silently took out a shot of spitting truth from dimensional space. "But I like double insurance." So after having administered the injection of spitting truth to Mu Yan, the duo repeated the previous question. It wasn't until this time that it could be confirmed that what she had said was true. In fact, before this, Zhang Yi believed 70 to 80% of Mu Yan. The reason was simple: he was strong enough, and following him was a better choice than following Zhu Zheng and waiting to be a feeder later. It was only the caution he had been exercising that made him still choose to put on a few more layers of insurance. It wasn't until now that he truly trusted Mu Yan. However, there was still a need to examine her more deeply before deciding whether or not to get her over from Zhu Zheng's side. Zhang Yi quickly returned to the shelter in Tianhai City. He gathered his entire family into the living room at the first time, and when everyone saw the battle, they knew in their hearts that something had happened. Normally speaking, Zhang Yi would not have summoned his entire family if he wasn't encountering a special and important matter. When Zhou Ker and the few others saw that Mu Yan had followed them over, they couldn't help but be curious in their hearts. Zhang Yi, did something else happen over at Blizzard City? Zhou Ker asked with concern. The crowd was also inquiring. Uncle Yu shook his shoulders, and there was a surprising urge to leap forward inside his eyes. He had been resting inside his home for more than half a year, and now that his strength had easily increased, he desperately wished to help Zhang Yi and go do something. Fatty Su had a worried look on his face, holding his big face, fearing that there would be something else for him to do that required risking his life. Zhang Yi directly told everyone what was going on. Xinjing's side has issued a summoning order to the 5 major regions, asking the top mutants from each region to go there to solve a problem that is causing them a headache. I intend to go over and take a look at the situation. Zhou Ker frowned slightly and said with some concern, wasn't the Xinjing region the most powerful in Huaxu Kingdom? How dangerous would it be if even they can't solve the problem? Zhang Yi smiled and put his arm around her shoulders. Don't worry, I told you, I'm just going to take a look at the situation, and if things are really very dangerous, I'll have my own way to escape. In the entire Huaxu Kingdom, Zhang Yi's ability to escape ranked second. No one should dare to rank first. Zhou Ker nodded, that's good. A hint of low spirits showed in Lu Karen's eyes. Once you left, again, it was unknown how long it would take for you to return. Zhou Haimei also said worriedly, when you're not around, it always makes people feel unsettled in their hearts. Sky Dragon King's attack had brought them a huge shock, allowing them to see that under the attack of the top mutants, ordinary people were as weak as ants. That kind of terror was like a natural disaster that mortals could only passively endure. Zhang Yi rubbed his hands together and said with a faint smile, I have considered this. To be honest, I wasn't very comfortable leaving you guys here. That's why I brought her here. Zhang Yi looked at Mu Yan. She is not a stranger to you guys. Mu Yan's ability can bring living people inside her shadow space. So when the time comes, you guys can come with me to Xinjing and walk around as if it was a pleasure trip. Even if you encounter danger, you can still enter her shadow. Mu Yan's ability was a kind of attachment. As long as she attached herself to Zhang Yi's body, she was absolutely safe if nothing happened to Zhang Yi. When the crowd heard this, they became excited. Zhou Haimei slapped her thighs. Aya, that would be great. Speaking of which, we really haven't left Tianhai City since the end of the world. Staying at home every day was good, but it's also boring. It would be great if we could go out for a walk. Zhou Ker and Yang Xia looked at Zhang Yi, but said, in that case, when you run into trouble in the future, you won't have to let you go out alone. We can't help you by staying at home, we can only be scared. Wherever you go in the future, we can accompany you. Isn't that great? The crowd was overjoyed. 1. It was because in the future, they could finally not have to stay at home all the time. 2. It was because they could follow Zhang Yi's side and be able to help him. In the past, they were too much weaker than Zhang Yi, so Zhang Yi didn't dare to take them with him wherever he went. But having said that, all these people within the family could provide Zhang Yi with great help. Whether it was Zhou Ker's healing ability, Yang Xia's supernatural recovery ability, Lu Karen's technological support, or Yang Xinxin's mind and lust angel control ability. All of these people were excellent aids. If they could be brought around, they could solve Zhang Yi's worries. Zhang Yi laughed, you guys can discuss this yourselves, if you want to go out with me then go. If you are too lazy to go out and want to stay at home, then stay and watch the house. Zhou Ker pouted, I was bound to go with you anyway. I don't want to leave you for that long. Yang Xia wrapped her arm around Zhang Yi's other arm, I was too. I can still help you cook good food when I follow you around. With little hesitation, everyone in the family decided to follow Zhang Yi out. Even the most timid and lazy Fatty Su was clamoring to go out with Zhang Yi. After all, he didn't feel safe staying inside the shelter by himself after everyone had left. It was better to follow Zhang Yi's side. Zhou Haimei looked at Mu Yan, who was sitting on the side and was a bit cold, and couldn't help but ask the question in his heart, girl, there are so many of us, that supernatural ability of yours, can you really bring it with you? Bringing so many people along could be very demanding for shadow space. This was because it took Zhang Yi a long time every time he went out. It wasn't just a matter of stuffing people inside, there was also the issue of food, clothing and shelter to consider. Mu Yan sat straight, her cool voice had a touch of sweetness. Don't worry about it, I am also a captain level after all, and although my space isn't as good as Mr. Zhang Yi's, it's still not a problem to accommodate a few thousand people. After saying that, she unfolded her shadow on the floor in front of the crowd, turning it into a huge circle. Everyone, please come in and take a look, she said, and led the way in herself. As the people stood in the middle of the circular shadow, they slowly sank in. Chapter 1133 Farewell to the Frog. Zhang Yi took a sip of hot tea and took the lead to walk in. His ability had already locked Mu Yan and he was not worried about her pulling any tricks. After walking into the shadow space, Zhang Yi realized that it was not as gloomy as he had imagined. It was a fairly large space, probably as large as the entire Yunk Manor. Under his feet was a sturdy ground, and while there was no moon above his head, the ceiling shone with a dark blue luster. It was huge, but empty. Just in the center of the shadow space, there was a huge double bed, with some clothes thrown randomly around it. Zhang Yi's eyes opened slightly, and scattered on the floor. Apart from the usual clothes, there were surprisingly many stockings and underwear. Zhang Yi just glanced at them, and Mu Yan instantly walked over with hasty footsteps and stuffed those clothes under the quilt. I live rather simply, Mu Yan deliberately said in a cool tone. The crowd followed at this moment, all exclaiming the immensity of shadow space. Mu Yan wasn't wrong, accommodating a few thousand people here didn't seem cramped in the slightest. As the inferior supernatural of Zhang Yi's ability, Mu Yan's shadow space had little ability to fight. Strictly speaking, it was used for possession and hiding, as well as storing supplies. It's a bit simpler, but it's not a big problem, Zhang Yi said indifferently. We can find a way to add some housing and furniture here. There's no shortage of supplies inside the shelter, it's a good solution. Lu Karen said, I'll solve the problem of housing, although I can't get many big villas, simple housing can be done in minutes. Shou Kir nodded and smiled, the conditions here are already very good. The crowd stayed inside shadow space for a while before going out. After all, this place was too empty and there wasn't much to see. After everyone went out, they began to start packing up their supplies, with a load of food and living materials being carried inside. The housing and furniture was left to Lu Karen and Zhang Yi to take care of. Lu Karen utilized her ability to quickly create a group of simple housing. Although it was said to be simple housing, it had all the facilities and was sturdy and durable. As for the furniture, Zhang Yi had swept through almost all the large shopping malls in Tianhai City, and there was no shortage of luxury furniture. Taking out some of them would be enough. Fatty Sue and Uncle Yu were responsible for the transportation. After Uncle Yu's drills, Fatty Sue's strength and endurance had improved quite a bit now, even though he hadn't lost much weight and size. Although he kept grunting and shouting that he was tired, carrying the furniture was obviously much easier than in the past. Everyone else was happily preparing their supplies for the trip, and had clearly treated this trip to Xinjiang as a tour. Zhang Yi looked towards a corner of the living room, where Totoro was sitting in a simple and cute manner not far from the fireplace, playing with his beloved bone flute. Right now, Zhang Yi still knew nothing about the origin of the Totoro. It was basically harmless and had become the favorite pet of everyone in the family. Although it possessed powerful supernatural abilities, it was not good at fighting. Now that everyone was heading to Xinjiang, Zhang Yi was considering whether or not to bring it along. After all, the existence of Totoro was a secret to Zhang Yi, and he did not want others to know about it. After thinking about it for a while, Zhang Yi decided that it was better to bring it with him. After all, it wasn't good to leave it alone. However, before leaving, he decided to say hello to the others. On the side of the three major bases, Zhang Yi quickly notified them, telling them all to be vigilant during this period of time, and to notify him at the first opportunity if any changes occurred in Tianhai City. Then, he walked out of the shelter again and came to the Heron River in front of Yunk Manor. Zhang Yi arrived at the riverside. The thick layer of ice was hard as metal, but there was a piece of ice that was light in color a few dozen meters away from the shore. Zhang Yi walked over and reached out to knock on top of the ice. Soon after, a huge frog crawled out from underneath the ice. Zhang Yi pulled back a certain distance, and the frog shook off the mud stains on its body with great force. Rib bit. Zhang Yi, what brings you here? Was it because you wanted to eat fish? Let me tell you, there are so many big fish in this river. I can't even eat them all. Zhang Yi smiled and shook his head. No, thank you for your kindness. Frog, we're leaving for a while. The frog froze at his words. Rib bit? Where are you going? Away for a long time. A hint of reluctance showed in his eyes. During these half a year, he had also developed deep emotions with Zhang Yi and the others, especially with Totoro. These two guys who didn't speak the same language had formed the best confidant through sound and rhythm. Without Totoro, all of his harp solos would be silent and cool. Zhang Yi thought about it and smiled. It shouldn't be too long. But it's hard to say. Rib bit. I know, I will wait for you here. You should know that frogs hibernate. As long as I close my eyes, I can sleep until the end of time. But as soon as you guys come back, all you need to do is to lightly tap on the ice, and I'll wake up right away. So I'll always be here waiting for you guys to come back, my friends. Zhang Yi smiled. The frog was always so likable. It seemed to have no worries in its world and always remained optimistic about everything. By the way, there is one more thing that I think I should tell you. The frog suddenly said. Zhang Yi blinked. What is it? The frog opened its arms, revealing its round belly. That was that the sound rhythm can open one's heart, and you can hear things that speech cannot express. Zhang Yi hugged his arms. You should know that I don't know much about music, I can only listen. And to me, as long as it sounds good, that's good music. Frog shook his head. No, I was not trying to discuss this with you. I was trying to say that through sound, I can feel Totoro's heart. He covered his chest and closed his eyes. I can feel its inner loneliness, as well as its confusion about this world. Zhang Yi raised an eyebrow. This frog was probably literally sick, and Zhang Yi was too lazy to pretend this with others. Aha, you're right. Then it's settled, we'll see you later. The frog hopped. Rib bit. We'll meet again when I wake up. Zhang Yi reached out to say goodbye to the frog. For the next 3 days, the whole family was very excited about their rare trip out and away, so they decorated their residence afterward, Muyan's shadow space, with extra splendor. Zhang Yi himself was shocked when he saw it. Because it was just like a huge and gorgeous manor. There were too many talents inside the home, and it was decorated with lights and colors, and there was everything inside. Even was laid artificial lawn, out of a huge yard. The introduction of water flow into an artificial lake, and even threw some small shallow sea fish into it with great interest. Zhang Yi was dumbfounded, thinking, you people really know how to play. This also highlighted a problem from the side. Everyone was really suffocating for too long, even though it was safe inside the home, but people always like to go out and see the animals in the distant scenery. Chapter 1134 Crow. 3 days later in the morning, Zhang Yi brought the crowd to Blizzard City. Zhu Zheng and Deng Shentong and the others were ready, just waiting for Zhang Yi's arrival. How do we get over there? Are there underground tunnels leading from Jiangnan region to Xinjiang region as well? Zhang Yi inquired. Zhu Zheng smiled. That one was just too slow, we have better transportation. With that, he led Zhang Yi and the others to Blizzard City's airport. It was a huge airplane silo, and after entering the doors, a very odd machine was presented in front of Zhang Yi and the others. That airplane looked extremely unique as it had no wings, only a huge cabin with a jet engine hanging underneath the fuselage. From afar, it looked like a giant grayish-white cigar. This is the transportation you will be using this time. Zhu Zheng said to Zhang Yi and the others with a smile. Lu Karen's eyes lit up when she saw the strangely shaped machine, and she stared at the airplane for a closer look. Fatty Sue muttered. Did the airplane wings forget to install? Uncle Yu blankly glanced at him without any good humor. What do you know? This is a military airplane, and it was using all of Huashu Kingdom's current top-notch technology. The wings were usually removed and only installed when in use. Deng Shintong explained to Zhang Yi, this was the latest model of jet airplane, produced in the Northern Realms Freemans. They have always been at the forefront of the world in the field of military industry, and their weapons are of the world's #1 caliber in terms of cold resistance. After the end times, many large military equipment were eliminated due to their inability to adapt to ultra-low temperatures. Like this F-37, it is a transport aircraft that can fly at high speeds and ultra-low temperatures. Deng Shintong had a few Heavenly God Squad members with him, and he didn't make much fanfare on this trip, appearing to be very low-key. It was probably also because he was clear about his status and was mainly accompanying Zhang Yi on the trip. And since Zhang Yi was a person who never liked to be in the limelight, he certainly had to follow suit and keep a low profile. After Zhang Yi and the others bid farewell to Zhu Zheng, they boarded the airplane. Until the time the plane took off, Fatty Sue and the others were still full of panic, afraid that this airplane without wings would fall. However, their worries were of course redundant as the V-37 quickly lifted off and then flew at a high speed towards the northern country. Fatty Sue squinted at Uncle Yu with a playful expression. Uncle Yu, didn't you say the wings were rear-mounted? Uncle Yu's old face blushed. Technology is changing rapidly, I don't know everything. Originally, he wanted to pretend in front of Fatty Sue, but he didn't expect to be slapped in the face. Uncle Yu looked at Fatty Sue and suddenly smiled. Fatty Sue understood in a second, and with a bitter face, he said, Uncle Yu, I was wrong, we were going out for a vacation, so don't give me any more practice. Zhang Yi looked out the window. At this time, frost had formed around the thick window glass. Even if it was the most advanced cold-proof material, it was difficult to be completely unaffected at high altitude. The clouds at high altitude carried a cold whiteness, the dark clouds were thick and heavy snow drifted down, as if this doomsday would never end. After the end of the world, Zhang Yi traveled to the north for the first time. He had been to Xinjiang, and at that time, he had only gone there for a vacation, and there was another time. Zhang Yi smiled faintly, and when he thought of that time, he couldn't help but feel a little strange in his heart. It was because at that time, he and Fan Yuqing were traveling together in Xinjiang. He was still very simple at that time. He had also once genuinely liked someone and longed for all the bright futures. But now, a year and a half of time had passed since the end of the world, and Fan Yuqing had died on that cold and harsh day. Everything, however, felt like a century had passed and things had long since changed. Zhang Yi leaned back on the comfortable sofa and slightly closed his eyes. Everything was unknown when they went to Xinjiang, so they would see what was waiting for them. Zhou Keir came to his side and asked gently, Zhang Yi, are you not feeling well? Zhang Yi covered his face with both hands and slowly said, it's fine, I'm just a little sad. It was only at this moment that he remembered. Fan Yuqing had never liked him. Seeing this, Zhou Keir tenderly put her arms around Zhang Yi, placing his head in front of her body and wrapping her warm bosom around him. The airplane swiftly swept under the cloudy sky, heading towards the huge city in the northern country. Northern Kingdom, Xinjiang. As the capital of Huashu Kingdom, this huge city lay like a crouching dragon above the northern land. While the snow-white ice field was now the main color of the pale earth, the enormous Xinjiang brought a deep bright yellow to this earth. The main color of Xinjiang was bright yellow, and yellow had represented kingship and honor in several recent dynasties. Therefore, in Xinjiang, you can see tall buildings of ancient style and complete palace complexes everywhere. Xinjiang City has a city within a city, and there is also the Ming Emperor's city within the outer city. Compared to the other regions, Xinjiang held the most resources and military power. The population that fed it was also the largest. This might have something to do with the fact that they were the first to find the Yuan ore located under the Qinling Mountain after the end times. The abundance of energy allowed them to feed a large population, including a portion of the civilians outside of Minghuang City. Today's Xinjiang was extraordinarily bustling, with heavy guards everywhere in Minghuang City, and the Dragon's Roar Guardians were loaded with bullets, and their figures could be seen in every corner. Because today was the day that the Xinjiang region had summoned the entire Huaxu Kingdom's 6 major powers to discuss national affairs. They had to show their strongest side to maintain the majesty of Xinjiang region so that the other 5 regions would submit. And in order to show enough sincerity, the one in charge of receiving them was also the real power in Xinjiang, the Dragon's Roar Guardians Grand General Xidagarba King, Shang Daowen. He wore a white special military uniform, and at around 40 years old, he was the perfect age for a man's physical strength and wisdom and emotional intelligence. And Shang Daowen was able to become the leader of Xinjiang's most important force, the Dragon's Roar Guardians, not only because of the great power he possessed, but also because of his careful and prudent nature, in which he showed off his inner strength. Early this morning, he arrived at the main gate of Ming Emperor City and began to start arranging for the reception. It was imperative to ensure that the 5 regions would not be given the feeling of overbearingness, but at the same time, the majesty of the Xinjiang region must be safeguarded. The first power to arrive in Xinjiang came from the northeast. The Dragon's Roar Guardians guarding the city were on duty when they suddenly noticed a large black cloud emerging from the sky, spreading towards Xinjiang from the horizon. The command center of Dragon's Roar Guardians immediately used their satellites for reconnaissance, and only then did they see clearly that the dark cloud was actually a large flock of crows. It was a huge flock of crows with scarlet eyes. Usually only crows that had eaten dead corpses would have such eyes, and their bodies were several times the size of ordinary crows, like small-sized eagles. The pitch-black feathers were like those made of raw iron, emitting an eerie cold aura. Thousands of crows circled in the air, their mouths emitting ominous cries. Caw-caw. Shang Daowen smiled faintly when he saw this scene. The crow from the northeast region is here. An exaggerated Harley motorcycle rumbled towards Xinjiang. On the bike sat a fat man in a black leather jacket with an inch hair. He had a bold face, his eyes were covered with large toadstools, and there was a red-colored crow squatting on his shoulder. Northeast Region, Epsilon Level Mutant Luya Dao Lord, Han Shanzhua. Chapter 1135 Northwest King. The people from the Northeast Region were the first to arrive in Xinjiang. The leader, Han Shanzhua, had a rakish demeanor that dazzled everyone on the walls of Xinjiang City. This was not like a powerful Epsilon mutant, it was clearly like a mutant boy who liked midnight racing. The transformed Harley snowmobile rumbled towards Xinjiang City, and behind it was followed by a group of Northeast Region's fleet. The corner of Shang Daowen's mouth revealed a smile as he grinned and brought people forward to greet them. However, looking at the crows that covered the sky, the muscles on Shang Daowen's face still couldn't help but twitch. I don't know what this Han Shanzhua's preferences were, but Xinjiang was not willing to let so many ominous birds fly in. Unlucky. However, as Han Shanzhua arrived under the gates of Xinjiang City, he stepped off his motorcycle, and the ravens that roamed the sky fluttered their wings, surprisingly transforming into a trail of black smoke in the air before eerily disappearing. He carried a blood-colored crow on his shoulder, removed the large toadstools on his eyes, and slowly walked to Shang Daowen with arrogant steps. Northeast Region, Luya Dao Lord, is here. Han Shanzhua raised his eyebrows and said as such to Shang Daowen. A hint of a smile appeared in Shang Daowen's eyes as he politely extended his hand to lead the way. Thank you for the Northeast Region representative's presence. Please enter the city first and take a short rest. We have prepared a dinner tonight, and when the representatives from the other regions arrive, Commander Qin will personally entertain you all and discuss the big events. Han Shanzhua nodded. No problem. He waved towards behind him. Brothers, let's go. The Northeast Region's convoy passed through the security check at the doors and drove into the city, with someone leading them to the resting area. Not long afterward, the second group of people who came arrived as well. It was none other than the people from the East Sea region. The airplane landed at the indoor airport. The jets had no wings. Surprisingly, they could hover just like a helicopter, and then slowly fell from the open roof of the airport. Shang Daowen led the crowd. The cabin door opened, and the first to walk down was a woman wearing a light blue combat uniform with long flowing hair and a resolute face. The representative sent by the East Sea region was Vermilion Bird. Black Tortoise's main body couldn't leave the sea, much less travel to Xinjiang to participate in the mission, but in order to show respect to the Xinjiang region, it still sent Vermilion Bird, a representative amongst the military. In the half a year after the Star Island mission ended, her strength had gained a huge boost, surprisingly reaching a height of 9,800 points. This was not due to the East Sea region's devoted cultivation, but it also had to do with the other of the four spirits. Azure Dragon had suffered a serious injury after that battle, and his vitality had plummeted. According to the doctor's deduction, he might live for another 5 years at most. This was the price one had to pay for forcibly acquiring power that didn't belong to them. The Xinjiang side of course knew that Black Tortoise was unlikely to come, but Vermilion Bird's arrival was considered to be giving a great deal of respect. Therefore Shang Daowen still received them warmly and arranged for them to go rest first. Vermilion Bird first asked Shang Daowen to find out what people had already arrived. After being told that only the northeast region had arrived, she stopped in her tracks. Vermilion Bird raised her eyes to look at Xinjiang City, which was filled with an ancient atmosphere, but she slowly shook her head at Shang Daowen. "No need, I need to wait for someone." Shang Daowen raised an eyebrow before smiling. "Well then, go ahead." Vermilion Bird gathered the clothes on her body, and instead of leaving, she was waiting right here. Eyes gazing into the distant sky, waiting for that person to arrive. This time she waited, it was more than an hour. And as an airplane flew in from the northwest and landed at Xinjiang's military airport, Vermilion Bird slowly raised her head, and a strange bright light flashed in her eyes. The representative of the northwest region, too, had arrived. Shang Daowen brought people to greet the representative of the northwest region, and compared to when he had greeted Han Shanzhua and Vermilion Bird earlier, Shang Daowen's attitude was obviously much more solemn. It seemed that this person who had come from the northwest region had some sort of special status. In fact, that was indeed the case. Of the 6 regions of Huaxu Kingdom, the 5 regions of Xinjiang, Jiangnan, East Sea Region, Northwest Region, and Southwest Region, the supreme officer and the strongest combatant responsible for commanding a party were not a single person. But only the Northwest Region was an exception. The strongest person in this region was himself a young talent from a military family. When he became an Epsilon-level mutant, he utilized his powerful personal strength and strong hand to ascend to the throne of Supreme Commander of the Northwest Region. Therefore, in the entire Huaxu Kingdom, the Northwest Region Commander's position was the most stable and the most solid in the region. In the Northwest Region, almost all the power was concentrated in the hands of one force, the force belonging to Supreme Commander Emperor Gochen, Li Changgong. The cabin's doors slowly opened, and Vermilion Bird couldn't help but walk over, her gaze towards the cabin door becoming somewhat fiery. An upright figure in military uniform appeared at the doors. It was a man around 35 years old. His tall and upright body was a bit thin, but his figure stood out like a javelin in the bitter cold wind. He wore white gloves on his hands, and one hand was pressed to the 2 long swords he carried at his left waist. His face looked like the best craftsman had polished it on steel with a carving knife, carrying a coldness that was not angry. Between his looks, there was a domineering aura of looking down on the living world. He also did have such qualifications. Because looking at the entire Huaxu Kingdom, he was perhaps the most powerful man. Northwest King, Li Changgong. When she saw Li Changgong, Vermilion Bird's gaze became excited, and Li Changgong lowered his head to see her as well, a faint smile appearing on his cold face. Shang Daowen went forward to express his greetings as well as his gratitude. After all, as the Northwest King, it was still a bit of a surprise to Shang Daowen that Li Changgong was able to come here in person. Although the Xinjiang region was the strongest as Huaxu Kingdom, the convening order issued this time might not be given face by every region. For the Supreme Commander of the Northwest region, whether or not he would be able to put aside his region's affairs and personally travel there, the Xinjiang region side was not clear at first. Li Changgong nodded toward Shang Daowen. I didn't just come here for the Xinjiang region's convening order this time, but I also have a bit of personal business. Shang Daowen was puzzled in his heart. Li Changgong had been in the northwest for years, and although he was also the son of a powerful family in Xinjiang, he did not have many interactions with Xinjiang after the end of the world. What kind of personal affairs could there be? At this time, Li Changgong crossed over him and walked towards Vermilion Bird. Vermilion Bird couldn't wait to walk over and open her mouth to shout, "Big brother." Li Changgong nodded towards her. "Little Han, how are you healing from the injuries you received over at Star Island?" Vermilion Bird, formerly known as Jiang Han. Jiang Han smiled. "It's almost healed." Li Changgong asked, "That fellow, has he come yet?" When he mentioned that guy, his eyes became obviously sharp, with an intimidating killing intent. Jiang Han took a deep breath. "That guy's character has always been cautious. This time, he may not come over."